So my name is Janet Davidson. I'm a historian at Cape Fear Museum in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I worked on a big project for the Smithsonian in my past life called America on the Move, which is about the rise of transportation from 1876 through the 20th century. And I was asked to come here to do a community curator talk, and the object that I picked to talk about was this 1903 Cadillac. And the reason that I got so excited about this Cadillac was that it represents this wonderful moment when nobody really knew what a car was going to look like. The technology was so new that it wasn't clear what side the steering wheel would be on, whether you had a roof, whether you had seats, whether you had lights, is there a windshield, is there not? There are all these questions about this technology. And so this 1903 Cadillac really stands at that moment before mass production sort of sets some of those things in stone, but also stands at this moment where there are hundreds of car companies, each vying for a place in American automobile enthusiasts' heart. And the fact that the Cadillac lasted up to this day gives you a chance to talk about that story with the long view, but the fact that this is such an early car really gives you this great opportunity to talk about early automobility and the rise of the car companies. So when I first got given the information out of the accession file, out of the museum's records about this car, I thought it was a really interesting automobile for a couple of reasons. Like I said, it's this moment of early automotive history. And so this Cadillac, I think it really looks a lot like a lot of early cars. And it reflects the way that many of these businesses, many of the manufacturers came out of already existing vehicle traditions. So it has the seats that make it look a lot like a carriage. It has this kind of uprightness, that sort of stand up from the roadness that makes it look like a carriage. And although this one doesn't have a lever, it has a more traditional steering wheel, a lot of cars really looked like they were carriages, and that's a lot of the reason they were called horseless carriages, but in part it's because so many early car companies were created by carriage makers. Another set of the people who developed those were bicycle makers, and those two groups of folks really were responsible for a lot of the early car manufacturers. And so this 1903 Cadillac really has some of the very classic look of an early car. I also really loved it that it's red. It sounds kind of dumb, but a lot of those black and white pictures from the early days make the world look so washed out and so lacking in color. And everybody always says the Model T, you can have whatever one you want as long as it's black, you know, that Ford was like that. He wasn't quite that much of a guy about it, but there were lots of red cars, and there's something about them that I really think looks wonderful and sort of gives you that sense that the world at the turn of the century was in Technicolor. We just don't necessarily think of it that way because of that kind of evidence that we have. So I started looking at Robert C. Greenlease, who was the owner of this car and the owner of the motor company. And then the whole kind of automotive world sort of opened up for me through that story, which made it an even better choice for me, personally as a community curator talk. Robert C. Greenlease moved to Kansas City when he was 15. He went to work at various sets of businesses, and he went to work for the Weber engine company that was owned by his uncle. He likely saw his cousin drive a car in 1901. He got really excited about it. He started his own car company, tried to make cars. They made 4, apparently, and they were called the Kansas City Hummer, which I just really like because today's Hummers. But there was this, you know, he is one of these people, one of these many young men at the turn of the century, mechanically inclined, who tried to get into the automotive business. His actual manufacturing business didn't succeed, but he went into the repair business and the livery business, and he very early on becomes a Cadillac dealer here in Kansas City. And he's an incredibly successful Cadillac dealer. He buys a new lot in 1918 and moves out to 29th and McGee. He's got this beautiful showroom and repair shop, and he spends more than 60 years in the business. So in the files that the museum sent me, there's this article called "This is Your Automotive Life," which is about this man in 1967, and they're looking back on his career as an automobile dealer. And so his story, to me, it sort of then opens up what happens after this chaos of this early period of car culture, and when large companies like Cadillac and Oldsmobile and Ford really come to dominate the car business. Because by the 1960s, we tend to forget it now. You see so many imported cars on the road, but 95% of the cars that were bought in 1955 were General Motors, Ford, or Chrysler. And so when you bought a car in the 1960s and 1950s, you bought an American car, and more people were buying them at greater and greater numbers. And so the story of the man who owned this and then donated it to the museum lets you extend that story of automobility up through the 20th century. And it was just a really great artifact to talk about the actual moment of in the 1910s and then kind of going on from there. So this 1903 Cadillac, from the ads that I've seen, cost about $750. And that's without the back set of seats. If you wanted those extra seats, they cost you another $100. So it was $850 in 1903. That doesn't sound like a lot, and in many ways that wasn't a lot for cars. There were some that were much more expensive than that. So Cadillac didn't have that cachet name brand thing going on from the beginning. But it is a lot when you think about the average industrial worker's salary at the time for the year would have been $500. So these early cars were not for everyone. And one of the innovations of mass production and Ford, and then everybody kind of follows along, was trying to create a car for what Ford called the multitude, or the masses. That you pay people enough that they can buy a car, and then they purchase it, and then you sell more and you make more. I mean, that's sort of the basic model of the American car business after developing mass production. And pretty much any car company that survived went with that model because, you know, it's more efficient to make things that way, and you can sell more cars. So this car is kind of a good example of an early car, but it isn't the sort of classy Cadillac that we think about today.